Hello and welcome to Writers and Books Visiting Author Series. This is a partnership between Writers and Books and Livonia Public Library. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages, all currently available online. Our theme for 2021 is Taking Care. We're celebrating different ways we can take care of ourselves and take care of others this year. You can check out our upcoming schedule at wab.org. Please say hello in the chat and let us know you're there. Feel free to submit questions to the Q&A function. Books are available through our bookstore Ampersand Books. I'll put the links in the chat. We're so excited to have Ed Fuller and Gary Grossman with us today. First, we'll show their book trailer, then we'll hear them read a selection, and then we'll talk. Best-selling author Jon Land has called Red Deception a relentlessly riveting tale that hones in on our greatest fears and takes us right to the brink in breathless fashion. Ed Fuller is CEO of Laguna Strategic Advisors, providing business consulting services worldwide. His book, You Can't Lead with Your Feet on the Desk, was published in 2011. His 40-year career with Marriott International included 22 years as president and managing director. He and Gary Grossman are co-authors of the Red Hotel series. Gary Grossman is journalist, television producer, media historian, and the author of Executive Actions, among many others. He has contributed to the New York Times and the Boston Globe and was a columnist for the Boston Herald American. Currently teaches at Loyola Marymount University. Now we'll take a look at their book trailer.
What the hell happened, Reilly?
Elizabeth, I was on the bridge when the truck exploded. This is right out of the report that I drafted for you. And then the attack in DC? Someone in your office leaked this. It came from inside. The terrorists followed it chapter and verse. I'm sorry, but there's going to be more.
Reilly?
The question is not who. The question is why. And the answer to that, they want to keep our eyes off the prize.
Gary and Ed, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Great to be here with you. Thanks, Dan. Thanks to everybody in Rochester and Rochester area.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Dan.
Thank you. And now, are you going to read a selection?
Sure. And thanks for playing the trailer. You know, these days, having a trailer and making it kind of feel filmic is a good way to bring readers closer to the story. That certainly does, and I'm going to pick right up with a selection, a short section that really plays right into the, oh, thanks so much, Nina. Cool book trailer, appreciate that, saw it in the chat. So we are in Washington, D.C., June 5th at 7:42 a.m. And I'll just say this is a bridge that Ed knows very fully and with lots of experience, and we'll talk about his experience and how it relates to Red Hotel and Red Deception, our current book. Morning rush hour traffic was basically normal, just typical commuters into Washington, with the squeeze occurring at the 14th Street bridges across the Potomac between Arlington and the district. Three options, one northbound, one southbound, and the busiest route, the bi-directional Rochambeau, named for the French Revolutionary War general who accompanied George Washington in the 1781 Battle of Yorktown. More than 75,000 vehicles cross the Interstate 395 bridge every day. Right now, 392 vehicles were bumper to bumper for all 2,483 feet of the span. Two 16-foot U-Haul delivery trucks, which had seen better days, were in the slow traffic approaching the bridge. They were roughly 12 car lengths apart in separate lanes. The drivers crept along, stopping and starting every few feet. It was one of those mornings. Soon it would be another. The pair of U-Haul trucks headed toward the nation's capital and onto the bridge, the corner vehicular span of the 14th Street bridges. A morning storm had cleared out, but the roads were still slick. Accidents would happen, most unintentionally, but one now on purpose. In the right lane, the lead U-Haul lurched forward and hit the back of a black Nissan with out-of-state plates. The impact caused the Nissan to slam into the car in front of it. A Chevy Impala. Traffic stopped. Some 50 feet back, the second U-Haul did the same in the left inbound lane. Predictably, the computers began yelling at one another and pointing to the trucks as the cause. But when they approached, the U-Hauls were both empty. The drivers, wearing identical jeans, black mock turtlenecks, and baseball caps, were moving fast, weaving around the stop traffic. They tipped their hats low to evade the bridge surveillance cameras, hopped the railing to the pedestrian sidewalk, and ran toward the Virginia side of the bridge. Precisely 2 minutes after leaving their vehicles, both trucks, each loaded with 30 pounds of C4 in the undercarriage, exploded. The blasts tore a 35-foot hole in the cement. The trucks plummeted into the Potomac along with 16 other cars. The blast zone took out another 37 vehicles, killing nearly 100 commuters in seconds. The shock wave blew windshields and windows out of the cars in both directions, seriously injuring scores more, many on the bridges instantly blinded. Commuters fled the bridge in both directions. Many were on their phones, calling loved ones or at their offices in the district or Virginia. Others just ran for their lives. Some stopped to help victims. One of them was Dan Reilly. Reilly was on his way into DC in the back seat of a taxi. He had flown into Reagan National from his Chicago corporate headquarters at Kensington Royal Hotels. He had a meeting scheduled on the Hill that clearly wasn't going to happen now. Not today, probably not for many days. The fact that he was in the backseat of the taxi and behind an armored car probably saved his life and his drivers. Reilly opened the car door, got out, and quickly assessed the situation. Disastrous, he reasoned. Definitely an attack. And I might say so much of what is in Red Hotel comes from Ed Fuller's experience. Ed was the former president of Marriott International. He was there after the plane crash over the Potomac at that bridge. And so many of the stories that you'll hear about really come right out of Ed's experiences around the world. So I am the luckiest co-author in the world getting the opportunity to work with Ed all the time.
And one of the kindest when it comes to compliments. I appreciate that, Gary. And our unique relationship, which I'm going to ask Gary to lead off on, is what has made these two books sell tremendously well. And we're in the midst of the third book, Red Chaos, right now.
I have to tell you, there is a James Bond connection to Ed Fuller for the two of us getting together, walking our dog, who's asleep probably in the corner there, just off camera level. Was walking our dog one night, bumped into a neighbor walking his dog. His dog was named Shadow. Our dog is named Thames. Bumped into this fellow, Bruce Fierstein. Very nice evening. And he said, Gary, I'm so glad that I bumped into you. I want you to meet somebody. I'm on a board with him at Boston University. He's a terrific guy. He's the former president of Marriott International. I thought, wow, I get to meet a really interesting guy. And then he said, but he's looking for a collaborator on a series of novels. And I'm a TV producer. I collaborate with a lot of people on documentaries and TV shows. But as an author, I'd never collaborated on a book before. And I thought, well, that's interesting, Bruce, but what do I have in common with the former president of Marriott International? And he said, you have to meet him. And you have to meet him because you know what I write and you know why I'm interested, what I'm interested in. It's going to be the same reason that you'll be interested in him. And I say that because Bruce Fierstein wrote the first 3 Pierce Brosnan James Bond novels. No wonder he has a dog named Shadow, right? I met Ed, and I'll turn it over to him in a moment, but I met Ed, and I used to say when Red Hotel was coming out, it took me 30 seconds. No, it took me less than 30 seconds, maybe 25 seconds to realize that Ed was as much in the anti-terrorism business as the hotel business, getting teams out of harm's way in Cairo at the fall of Mubarak, and when Gaddafi fell in Tripoli, dealing with triads and gangs in cartels in Mexico, the stories that really put him in the danger zones around the world, protecting our interests in a way that I had never, ever imagined. So we shook hands across the table, and here we are today with our second book. And I'm just so happy to work with Ed. And I think everyone will find what we write about thrilling because it's based on reality. They're political reality thrillers.
And Gary is truly the master of putting things together. I had written the book you mentioned, Dan, which is You Can't Lead with Your Feet on the Desk. And I had written that as a business book. And Gary even still goes to that book for some questions and ideas.
Lots of tabs in it. Uh-huh.
And I had written that while I was still working for Marriott. So a couple of the incidents that Gary just touched on had not even happened then. But I enjoyed writing it, and I had really read it or created it as a business book. So with that in hand, when I retired, I said, well, I can write a novel. Well, guess what? Not everybody can write a novel. I started off with chapter 1. The wind was blowing, the trees were flowing back and forth, and they had sex. But then I said, well, I can do chapter 2. It followed the same format, ending the same way, but they were up on a snowy mountain. I said, chapter 3, I can't handle it. I'm done. I don't have the skill. And so Bruce's introduction to Gary turned out to be much more important for me to be able to work with someone like Gary. So we have been at this for 5 years, 6 years.
Oh my God. Well, do we count the before times, which I call the times before COVID? So I think we're well going into 6 years.
A new use for the term BC, before COVID. But history's changed that code already. The interesting thing, though, is Gary's ability to pick up where I could not. I could tell a story, and I can tell a story about many, many, many incidents. Example might be our situation in Panama.
Yeah.
And during Noriega's reign, of course, the Americans were really upset, not to mention Noriega, when the Americans showed up to try to regain the Panama Canal, which was of huge strategic importance. And when they were there, we had one hotel in Panama City. And Our GM was back in the US having an operation. And so our team was totally Panamanian. And we had about 62 guests in the hotel. And they could see the Panamanian army under Noriega's guidance coming toward the hotel. They immediately hid the customers in the laundry, in the various machines in the laundry, covered them with clothes, and then shut the doors. Several of these customers got very close during that period, but they were in all sorts of dryers, washers, wherever. And they went through the hotel. Noriega's men machine gunned every room without checking who was in there, and came to the conclusion everybody was gone except the Panamanian staff, who stood by very quietly. They took them down into the laundry. Nobody here, nobody in housekeeping. They came back upstairs and left. Later, which is another story which we won't touch on now, we sent trucks in and two companies of infantry to protect them, and we got those guests out of the hotel. Simple explanation, we take care of our guests and our associates. And when our associates, who had closer ties to Panama than we did that, you could tell the loyalty to the company was great.
Boy, there's something that resonates too now in Afghanistan, and getting our translators and those people who were affiliated with our troops and our efforts in Afghanistan out. And the lesson you're talking about is right there. By the way, we do our interviews. I always have a pencil in my hand because we're having an interview. We're promoting Red Deception. No, I'm also doing research on the next book, because whatever Ed says, I'm writing down. And I got some more information in terms of the number of guests that you had in the Panama hotel, which I didn't think I had before or had not written down. So I'm always getting more information. And I have to say, as my voice cracks, wow, I get back to my home state, New York, and I become a teenager again. I have to say that meeting Ed and working with him, it's akin to sitting down at a dinner party and finding yourself next to the most interesting person in the world. He's done these things and been to these places, 150 countries over the years that you've worked in, with how many hotels and throughout those countries you could talk about, and just being regaled by these stories, and then having the opportunity to write with him, to work with him, and to bring these stories out, yes, in fictional form, but how much is fiction and how much is real? Well, when you start with an attack in Red Deception on the infrastructure of America, on bridges, on Lincoln Tunnel, on the bridge across the Mississippi, the Stan Musial Bridge, and ultimately the Hoover Dam, which was pretty well protected during World War II. What are we doing now? What kind of surveillance, what kind of protection does it have? And what is the reason that our infrastructure is being attacked? Who's behind it and why? Well, the word deception comes into play for that. Deception meaning there's a bigger scheme and a bigger player, and that bigger player is a man named Nikolai Gorshkov. He's a stand-in for Vladimir Putin, and the bigger effort is what his efforts and endeavors are to reclaim the old Soviet territory that was lost at the fall of communism. And that's his dream, as is Putin's dream.
I'm kind of watching Dan for cues, but I'll follow up on Gary's points. What made my life very fortunate was that when I started the international division, we had a couple of hotels outside the United States. I had Hong Kong, and I was the West Coast COO. And so when Bill Marriott asked me to become the leader for the international effort, we had very few hotels. We made about 300 million, but they put me in the job, and I assembled a great team who I always note in the book that would deal with all sorts of situations. We had owners who carried guns to meetings and would cover them with the napkin if it was lunch. And we had situations where owners would try to intimidate contractors, and one example in Turkey. And so my good fortune was I had that job for over 22 years. Otherwise, I wouldn't have this plethora of stories and examples, because over those 22 years, I got to know a lot of people in different areas, and I got to really enjoy and deal with the culture, which is very important to me and is really, to me, the mainstay of doing business in another country. Gary was trying to highlight the numbers. We were operating in 73 countries when I retired in 2012. We had opened over 550 hotels, and we'd gone to $8 billion in sales. I had reached my 40th year with Marriott, and Bill Marriott and I retired the same day in March of 2012. So it was time for me to go too. But I had a great project out here in California, and this is where I wanted to be, nice warm weather. Well, they've taken it too far on the warm weather, but this is where I was hiding. But when you think about it, so this is something for me. I taught at University of California, Irvine, as well as Cal State, both Pomona and San Diego, and taught for about 8 years at UCI, taking a break with COVID. And the interesting things is that some of the stories, which aren't quite as exciting, but are doing business in these countries, are really pretty exciting in their own right, but are business. And so the fun came with Gary and I working together. Really very important for my ability to keep busy as a retiree. Gary's not retired yet by a long shot. And people say to me, "You're not retired." And I said, "Well, I was working a lot harder before, but I'm having more fun." And Gary's that fun.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed.
I'm sorry. I just want to jump in and say, yeah, if our audience has any questions, please submit them. I have a few questions,
Sure.
Some of which you've touched on a little bit, but yeah. So Gary, you said this was your first time collaborating on writing. I'm curious what your process is.
Thanks, Dan. Great, absolutely great question. I had to learn a process, and Ed and I had to figure out what was the best way to work. Well, the best way to work was to meet, was to sit down. We first did it over lunches, and we did it over dinners. We added breakfast to it. And now in the past year, certainly more Zoom calls. We don't live that far away, about a little over an hour away, but we have found that a good 3-hour Zoom conference every week goes a long way to us having a sense of where the story is plotting and what we're doing. Normally, as a journalist, I will record stories, and then go back to the office. And if it was television and television news, then quickly go into editing. If it was a newspaper, as I did in Boston, quickly write the story. I haven't been doing that with Ed. I take notes. I take copious notes when we're together. But I always find, it goes back to my high school days in the Hudson Valley. If I'm writing something with my hand, it's going to my head. If I'm just recording, I I might be thinking of the next follow-up question more than really listening. And I'm not in the moment as much. So I do like to take notes. From those notes come an outline. From the outline comes further discussion with Ed. And then I begin writing. And then all through that process, Ed says regularly, how about this story, working this story in here? Could we make that work? And some of that then becomes backfill. Okay, to make that story work, we have to backfill. And other times it's, oh my God, it's the right story at the right time. And we are collaborating all the way through. But Ed will take the manuscript after the first draft is done. And that's where the real massaging comes in. So it's a collaboration. There's some writers, one writer will write the first chapter and the second writer will write the second, and then the first writer will write the third, and they'll keep bouncing back and forth. That's not the way we do it. But it's constant communication, which is what really makes it a living, breathing collaboration for us. Also, Red Hotel began with a story that parallels the bombing in Jakarta at a hotel, which Ed can talk about. We moved it over to Tokyo. So it starts right away with something that is dangerous and thrilling and deadly and real. And I wrote down in your introduction that your umbrella right now is taking care. I have learned so much about, and never knew how Marriott takes care of its guests in ways that I never could have expected. I've also learned our responsibility for taking care, and that is, learn from Ed. If you see something, say something. If you're in a hotel room, say something if something's out of place, and Ed can fill you in on stories. If you're walking down the street and you see a suitcase that's just lying there, or an airport that's just sitting in the middle of the terminal, you got to say something. That's where we are today. It's not so different from World War II, where there were civilian corps that were watching the skies. Well, those planes never really came. There were some attacks on the U.S., but here in every hometown, everywhere across the country, whatever we're doing, we have to say something.
If you want me to add just one note, Dan, and you can cut me off, we're a vocal twosome, and so the title Red Hotel is not got anything to do with communism, Russia. It comes from the fact that when I first got in my job, I was sitting right here in California because I was in this region originally. And when I first got the job, one day I got a call pretty late at night from my chief of security and said, "Oh my God, someone has kidnapped our entire executive committee from the hotel, from their houses, in front of their families and the kids, and they've disappeared." So we spent 3 days working on trying to get them back and identify where they were. It took another couple of days before we got them back in an exchange program. We actually then worked with our owner there, which most people are familiar with, CMX, which is a ready mix company. They had no ability to reach in to the Cancun area to get any extra help. So we had to evacuate certain people that might have been caught up in this, and we certainly had to look after the families and get them out. We put another team in because we didn't want the guests to even understand what was going on. And it turned out that we had found a drug organization, our security people, and we had just interviewed the last night the guy that was running the beach at Cancun, all the hotels, and selling various drugs to guests in the hotels. And so when he knew he'd been identified by us and we were going to go after him, he immediately went to the leader, who happened to be the governor of Cancun. And that's why those people were picked up. A lot of drama built into that, but in a short story, the real challenge was we didn't have a system in the company. And you'd be amazed, since I've done this, how many companies I've talked to and helped try to get a crisis organization together, a system, etc. And those things lacked one thing. In the US, you have a coded system run by the US government. Outside, you have any number of statuses that just don't make sense. One's purple, another's a butterfly, you know. So we had to get a common set of goals that established whether a hotel was high risk at red or a low risk at clear. And the first book talks about how we developed that. And we have used it with one exception, which I'm not going to go into detail right now because I see Dan shifting a little. And that detail was we had to raise it to a higher level when we got into another area of bombing.
That's, wow, that's very interesting. One of my questions was just how about all the blurbs and reviews for this book talk about how realistic or plausible these scenarios are. I was wondering how you balance the realism of that with telling an exciting story. It sounds like many of these real life events are just as interesting as fiction. But how do you incorporate them into a story or a novel like this?
Well, Chef Grossman, who is the man that blends these stories in and left me still looking at chapter 3, trying to figure out what I was going to do, is the man that can tell you that story better than anybody, but he is a true executive chef of words.
You know what, I'm going to call my wife in right now so she can, well, it's too late. She'll have to watch the recording when you're playing it again. Okay, thank you, Ed. It really goes to if we think of something, if we're thinking the unthinkable, maybe the bad guys can think of the unthinkable too. It might be the unknowable at this point, but at this point it might be the unthinkable. Well, if it is the unknowable, then maybe it's really even plausible. And that's where we start. What would make an interesting story that maybe hasn't been written this way? And certainly Dan Reilly, the character you saw in the trailer and the lead character in the book, is very much drawn from Ed Fuller and his experiences and exploits. But we're trying to think out of the box, or at least kind of peer into the box that maybe hasn't even been opened yet. And I'll go back to 9/11. Who were among the first people called into Washington to speak to the Pentagon and the CIA, the NSA, to explain to the people how this happened and what could happen next? What are we not thinking about from an intelligence point of view? Who were those people? They were people like and including Bruce Fierstein, the James Bond screenwriter. They're thriller writers who've written before, and I didn't start writing until after 9/11, but thriller writers who were writing then. They were screenwriters like Bruce Fierstein and directors of action movies. And you start thinking about something that it comes out of whole cloth in your head. Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. And I'll go back to if you see something, say something. we could have written it years ago and people would say, oh, come on, this couldn't have happened. A person goes into a flight academy in Arizona or New Mexico and says, hey, I want to learn how to fly a 747, a jumbo jet. Great, sign right here. Now we also spend time on taking off and landing. And the person says, no, I don't need to know how to land it. Wouldn't that make you think? And that would make a great novel, right? But if it were happening in real life, wouldn't that make you think, I better tell somebody about this guy or these people want to know how to fly a plane, but they're not interested in knowing how to land it? That didn't happen. Nobody was told. And those were the people who took over the planes in 9/11. So, yeah.
It really speaks to the power of and importance of imagination. And it's very interesting that all these creative people were consulted on this. I have a question from the audience, from Nina. Just curious as to what Gary and Ed's favorite books or movies are, and if any informed or inspired this book style.
Well, I'll give not a long list when it comes to movies, because I'm pretty particular. I did my time in Vietnam, did my year in Vietnam, so I tend not to watch Vietnam movies. And one night, I was on one of the beaches and we just completed a mission, and somebody pulled out a movie and it was called Diary of a Mad Housewife. And I'm sitting here saying, we're being mortared and we're watching that kind of movie. I'm only going to Gidget Goes to Hawaii. But since I've been working with Gary, one of my favorite movies is Salt. And it is a fantastic movie. And there's a parallel movie. Gary, do you remember the name of that parallel?
Red Sparrow.
Right. And so those type of movies kind of follow along with what we've been looking at. So when it comes to authors, of course, number one and number two on my list are Red Hotel and Red Deception. Once we get past that, I really go into the traditional Clive Cussler and the like. And so I'm not very creative in choosing something, but I do a lot of reading, especially off news media, current activities, so I can understand what's going on. And I'm not sure people understand quite what's going on right now with Russia, China, and the world as a whole. But I find little clips about that, and it helps me think of things that we can blend into our stories. Gary is much bigger in the reading world and the TV world than I am.
And we have overlaps in books. In fact, I just gave Ed a copy of one of my favorite books. And in fact, I read it as a teenager, and I still like to read it every couple of years because it is a lot of what we write about. The old book, 7 Days in May. If you remember that book and the movie, I highly recommend it. It also has echoes of American politics and American history within the last 8 months. And some of the news even breaking today, wherever you are in the political spectrum. That is a good book to go back and read and lay it against what we have seen. I love Lee Child's books, the Jack Reacher books. I love Michael Connelly's Bosch and the TV series tremendously. And Lincoln Lawyer is coming along now as a TV series. I tend to like action movies. But every so often, if I make my wife sit down and watch an action movie, then that means I've probably got to watch 1 or 2 films from Sweden. I don't know. It just pays off that way. But I grew up in the 60s, likewise with Ed, and we were affected by a changing time. And the times keep just changing quicker and quicker. So in terms of the style, to Nina's question, in terms of the style, We're writing, I think it's safe to say, Red Chaos, the third book, is a quicker pace. Red Deception was a quicker pace than Red Chaos, and Red Chaos was already a quick book, written in a filmic style, a cinematic style, much like the trailer that you saw, because I think we're used to things happening quicker and multiple things happening at the same time. Our hero, Dan Reilly, is not James Bond or Bourne, somebody out there like the Lone Ranger just working on his own. He is somebody who collaborates with people, just as Ed did, working with the CIA and the FBI. He's on an FBI board today, and intelligence organizations around the world. That makes this different than some of the other just action thrillers. That's why I go back to say it's more international reality and a political reality.
Can I just add to that, Dan, one thing? So we were talking about leisure reading there. When it comes to culture, if you have not read the history of the country you're interested in, you don't understand the people or the environment. So I spent well over 120 trips to China over my career in Marriott and the follow-up career I had out here in Orange County, marketing in that marketplace. And I will tell you, if you don't understand the Opium Wars and the concurrent Boxer Rebellion that followed, you don't understand what's going on in China today. And when I worked in Germany in the army, I was German, and I really was curious what would have happened to me had I been there back in the 1939 era. And it took a lot of study, and I resolved that question, and it gave me some comfort along the way.
Thank you. Just very quickly, since we're running out of time, what's next? I think you mentioned another book in the series.
Gary, it's going to be an exciting book, I think. We've been working on it for almost a year, and we've still got a ways to go, but it's called Red Chaos, and maybe Gary can add some points that would help.
Well, it picks up right where Red Deception ends. And again, it picks up with stories that are right out of Ed's life, but an international, we broaden the world a little bit. Our main player, Nikolai Gorshkov on the bad guy side, is still active and interested, as is Vladimir Putin today. I mean, you look at what's happened in the last few years, he's really at Ukraine's doorstep, having already taken over Crimea. He wants Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, and then kind of fill in all the countries. That's his goal. He wants to destabilize the United States, create chaos wherever possible. But the other thing that's at play here is just a little thing called climate change, global warming. How does it affect? How is that butterfly affecting the whole world? Now it's not a butterfly. It's more like one of these flying monsters out of a Japanese movie. The northern ice flow is melting, as we know, in the Arctic. Who's controlling that region right now? Russia, with its nuclear-powered icebreakers. They are controlling what is the northern sea route, which is a perfect lane to get gas and oil and petroleum products to China. Russia needs money. Russia has oil. China has money. China needs the oil. It's the perfect relationship. And if you even Google that kind of equation, you will see how that moves both of those countries up in our concern in America, and really makes China ultimately the bigger player. So things start shifting over to China in Red Chaos, and there's not really giving any any spoiler alerts there, but that's the historical background that, restate it. That's the contemporary, current history, current news background that kind of drives, that will drive Red Chaos, which will be out in a year. Beaufort Books is our publisher, and they are very excited about this third book. And we are continuing to have conversations about turning these into movies as well.
Wonderful. I want to thank you both so much. This has been great. Buy their books. It's links in the chat. This video and will be up on YouTube. You can check our website for other past readings we've had. I want to thank our funders here. And I want to say thank you all for coming, and have a good weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All the best.